Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back. This is our final deep dive video going over vocals. This video is going to feature 2 female vocals, which is cool. I'm glad that I was able to incorporate female vocalists in this course in some way, so that's great. Similar to our last 2 videos, we're going to start out and just kind of check in about our major frequencies of interest. Then we're going to jump to Pro Tools. Then I encourage you to stick around because I'm going to show you my typical vocal processing chain. It's going to be kind of a bird's eye view. I won't have time, or rather, it's beyond the scope of the course to talk in detail about compressors and dynamic processing, but it'll be helpful just to kind of see what my vocal processing chain typically looks like, just so you can take that info and put it in your pocket for later. So that's also cool. With that said, let's jump into it. Vocals, frequencies of interest, and our standard game plan. Usually our first move is to apply our high pass. A good default position is going to be around 75 to 90 hertz. It varies wildly just depending on the vocalist and the key and the song and yada yada, but either way, independent of where you choose to specifically place it, it's essential that you engage a high pass somewhere because it's really common for the vocalist for any vocalist to shoot out big plosives, big puffs of air that spike our low end. That just sounds terrible. We don't want that at all. Engage a high pass. Next, similar to acoustic guitar, we should consider whether or not we need any big tilting. Do we need to wide boost or wide cut any major frequency ranges? Specifically, I'm thinking about the low mid body of the vocal, usually between 200 and 600 hertz, and the high mid brightness and clarity, usually between 2K and 6K. I'm asking myself, do both of those spaces feel relatively balanced with one another, or do I need to kind of wide boost or wide cut either of those? Once we've done that, the final thing is just to kind of comb through, listen critically, see if we can identify if there are any overly present mid-range frequencies that we need to notch out. Again, kind of similar to acoustic guitar. With vocals, the range that we want to consider is between 350 and 2K hertz, especially if the vocal is tracked in like a bedroom or a closet. It's common for somewhere in that space to be some unflattering frequency buildup that we need to just kind of notch out and get out of there. So that's our standard plan of attack with vocals. With all that said, let's see it in action and jump to Pro Tools. This first song we're going to look at is called Permanent by Brianna Ibarra. Great song. Loved working on this. Just like previous videos, the top track is our instrumental. This purple guy is our vocal track. Below it, I have my reverb track. And then below that, I have my parallel compression mono vocal track, which I can talk about in more detail a little bit later. Something I want to highlight quickly is that you'll notice our vocal track has been split and crossfaded dozens and dozens of times. That is me identifying and manually de-essing my vocal, which I highly suggest that you do as well. Oftentimes, a de-esser on your vocal track is not good enough. It just doesn't get the job done. There's still excess harshness and S sound that we don't want. And the most surefire way that you can get those out is to just take an extra 5 minutes and just manually comb through, identify all of your S sounds, and do some clip gain editing and notch those out. A little bit more about that later. Let's get started and just listen to the song. This features all of our vocal processing, including our vocal EQ. Let's hear it.
I'll be waiting at the shore. If you're ready to come back home, if your vessel is tired and worn, and you can't take any more.
Cool. What a beautiful song. Let's solo our vocal, open up the hood here, see our EQ curve, and listen again to our vocal in isolation.
I'll be waiting at the shore. If you're ready to come back home.
Cool. And then we can turn off all of these EQ bands, hear how the vocal sounded originally.
I'll be waiting at the shore. If you're ready to come back home.
All right, so the first adjustment I want to look at is the one that is, to me, the most obvious, which is these two bands that are working together to notch out some frequency buildup happening at around 300. 300 is usually a good starting place for any given female vocal. Unlike with male vocals, a good starting place is usually around 200. Female vocals, it's going to be closer to around 300. This vocal performance is an excellent example. When she ends the phrases, I'll be waiting at the shore, and she ends at the bottom, she's ending at about 300. And when we get there, I heard some unflattering frequency buildup, some excess body happening. So let's hear what I'm talking about and solo these bands.
I'll be waiting at the shore. If you're right.
Yeah, when we get there, it just feels too present. It just feels like we arrive at the end of the musical phrase, and all of a sudden we have a big boomy vocal, which I did not want. So that's what both of these bands are doing. Not super dramatic, only about 4 dB worth of gain reduction, but to me, definitely worth it. The next adjustment to look at is this one to the right, this blue narrow notch. That's happening at about 550. Let's hear what this sounds like. Yeah, so 550, 600 hertz is typically another trouble spot with female vocals. This, again, is not super dramatic, but to me, when it's there, it's there. It's like it kind of feels like all I can hear. Let's hear some before and afters toggle on and off this cut.
Oh, I'll be waiting at the shore. Oh, I'll be waiting at the shore. Oh.
Cool. So the next adjustment to look at, we're kind of jumping around here, but we can go ahead and engage our high pass. I've placed the high pass pretty aggressively at about 95 or 100 hertz. As you might guess, just by virtue of a female vocal typically being in a higher register, you can usually high pass it more aggressively than you would a male vocal. We can actually try to isolate the low end and hear what we're cutting.
I'll be waiting if you're ready to come back home.
The next one to look at is this additional cut we have here. It's even lower than our fundamental 300-ish cut that we've already talked about. This is closer to 260-ish, so we can hear what this sounds like.
Waiting at the shore. If you're ready to come back home. If your vessel is tired and warm.
Yeah, so it's just some extra insurance that this low-end body of our vocal doesn't kind of get out of control. And then the final adjustment to look at is this high shelf we have going on. It's super subtle, but I just felt like the vocal needed a little bit of a lift, a little bit more clarity and presence overall. So let's isolate the shelf and see what we're boosting.
And you can't take any more. Oh, I'll be waiting at the shore.
For a high shelf, it's really placed very low. I mean, it's placed like at 800 hertz. So as you can hear, as you just now heard, we're capturing and boosting like 65% of the overall vocal sound, which is why I've just kept it pretty subtle. We're only boosting it by about 1 dB, but we can toggle it on and off and you can hear the difference. I feel like it is a worthwhile adjustment. Let's hear it.
And you can't take any more. Oh, I'll be waiting at the shore.
Nice. Let's hear our vocal now in the context of the song. Let's turn off our EQ. So we're just getting the raw vocal sound. Let's hear it.
I'll be waiting
And then we can turn it on.
I'll be waiting at the shore. If you're ready to come back home.
Nice. So not totally night and day, not a radical change, but to me, more present on top and not as low, mid, buildy, uppy. Let's take an extra couple minutes and just crash through my overall vocal processing chain here. You can see on the channel, I've got 6 plugins. It's a EQ, or tone shaping EQ that we've already gone over. And then we have a few compressors, a multiband compressor, and then another EQ right at the end of the chain. So let's just kind of crash through what these are and what they're doing. This first compressor is a de-esser. All it is doing is I'm just grabbing those harsh S sounds. You can see on the bottom kind of what that is that I'm telling the compressor to only pay attention to our highest of highs, just the S sounds, and that if the S sounds cross a certain dynamic threshold, then I want the compressor to grab those S sounds and pull them down in volume. So basically at the top of our chain, we are reducing the S sounds. Next, we have another compressor. This compressor is really gentle. The ratio is about 2-to-1, which is pretty gentle. It's got a medium attack and a medium release. The idea behind this is that I'm really trying to capture most of the vocal dynamically. I want it to catch 70 to 85% of the vocal and just really gently bring it down by a few dB, just trying to subtly squeeze the entire vocal together. That's what we're doing here with this compressor.
If you're ready to come back home.
Then we have another compressor. So this is our third compressor in a row. This one is dramatically more aggressive. I am making sure that I'm grabbing everything. It's a more aggressive ratio. It's closer to about a 4-to-1. You can see that the attack down there is the fastest that I can possibly set it because I don't want anything to get past this compressor. Between this compressor and the last compressor, I'm aiming for between 4 to 5 dB total worth of gain reduction.
If you're ready to come back home. If your vessel is tired and worn.
Next, I have a multi-band compressor. You can see that I have created 3 different bands. This is a bit of a catch-all solution just to safeguard. When I press play in a moment, you can see that it's not going to really engage because it is more targeted at lines later in the song where Brie gives a way more dynamic belty performance that I'm just trying to do a little bit of extra insurance and just kind of capture those peaks in a balanced way. So that's the thinking behind this multi-band compressor right at the end of the chain.
I'll be waiting at the shore. If you're ready to come back home.
And then closing out our vocal chain is one final EQ. We start with an EQ and then we ended with an EQ. We have a notch here at about 1K. We can hear that in a second. I just feel like our radio frequencies are a little overly present. And then I added an additional high shelf boost. Once we got down to it and once I was mixing the song and pressed along, I just felt like, you know what, the vocal just still isn't bright enough. It's not sitting on top of the mix enough. So I gave our high end just another extra little boost. Let's listen to both of these adjustments.
If you're ready to come back home.
Cool, so that's our vocal chain on our actual vocal track. Now I want to look at this green track below it. I mentioned at the top, this is our parallel compression vocal track. What I'm doing here, you can see in a minute, I am compressing the living hell out of this track. I am just annihilating this vocal track. The idea being is that I'm just making it a brick, and then I'm going to lower the fader dramatically in volume until it's just an extra little layer that ensures our vocal always stays present. It never kind of dips below the mix. So let's actually hear what this track sounds like.
I'll be waiting at the
And you can see on the compressor, I'm getting like 15, 18 dB worth of gain reduction or whatever that is. I am deliberately squashing the hell out of it. And now let's listen real fast to our whole vocal mix with and without this mono parallel compression track engaged.
I'll be waiting at the shore. I'll be waiting at the shore.
And that's our parallel compression track, an extra little trick that you can put in your back pocket. Before we close out here, the final thing that I want to highlight, let's just turn on our vocal track, make it volume mode. So you can look at this volume automation curve that I handcrafted. I wanted to highlight this because so often producers and engineers and songwriters depend entirely on compression plugins to place their vocal on top of the mix to get it sitting right. And really the truth is that we want the compressors to do 70 to 80% of the work, and that final 20% goes to by hand vocal automation. I comb through the song line by line, and with a fader, I actually boost and cut specific lines until the vocal is sitting exactly where I want to in the mix at every moment. So, important thing to highlight. It's a common misconception that, if you know what you're doing with a compressor, then all you have to do is just dial in the perfect settings and the vocal sits flawlessly. But in reality, compressors do 80% of the work, and then the remaining 20% is by hand vocal automation. It adds that extra human quality that is just so essential. And then finally, just circling back to something that I said earlier in the recording, these edits, zooming in really tight, these edits are me manually de-essing the vocal. I don't trust any de-essing plugin to do a perfect job. I want to make sure the job gets done right, and I'm going to comb through the vocal and manually clip gain all of the S sounds and bring them down. It's tedious, it's boring, but is absolutely worth it. Do not depend 110% on a de-essing plugin. Take the extra minute and do it yourself, and know for sure you're going to get a quality final product. And that is it for this first vocal. Let's jump to the next vocal. This final song is by Lion of the Pines. She is a great songwriter. I loved working on her EP. I mixed it. It was produced fantastically. Had a great time working on it. Before we talk too much, let's just listen to it and hear what we got.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man who whisper words we wanna forget how.
Great. Let's solo our vocal, bring up our EQ, and hear it again.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man.
Nice. As you can see, this is a really extreme EQ curve. Let's bypass this EQ and you can hear what it sounded like when I got it.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man.
Wow, so such a huge world of difference. Our raw vocal just sounds super boxy, super mid-rangey, way too much low end, yada, yada, yada. So this EQ curve is extreme, but I think as you will see in the next couple minutes, definitely justified here. Our first adjustment to look at is our biggest, most dramatic cut at about 650. Let's isolate this range and hear what I cut so aggressively.
If we erase the man who whisper words we wanna forget how loudly our laughter someone had.
Yeah, so this cut is insane, but for me, it's necessary. Like, that specific range was just so overly present. I remember when I was mixing this, I just kept cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting until I got here, and I was like, well, it looks insane, but it's doing what I wanted to do, so there you go. The next adjustment is the one to the left. This one is a little bit more subtle. It is at 360. Let's hear this range in isolation. Cool. So this is closer to our vocals' true fundamental. Again, definitely over present, getting way more of it than we want. Let's hear the before and afters toggling this band on and off.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man who whisper words.
Yeah, immediately way cleaner, way better. Keeping in that same line of thinking, we can look to the left, the next wide, low, mid cut. Let's solo this.
Who whisper words, we wanna forget how loudly our laughter.
Nice. To me, sounds a lot better. We're definitely getting pretty close here. I do want to mention that we're kind of entering into thin territory, meaning like our vocal kind of sounds a little bit too thin. I should say that, of course, I mixed the vocal in context of the song. And as you may have heard when we listened to the entire song, there are big vocal stacks of vocoder vocals, a lot of background and harmony layers. So the lead vocal doesn't have to do as much heavy lifting. So if there weren't so many additional vocal layers, then I would not have made our lead vocal as thin. But I think that when you hear all of our adjustments in context, it'll make more sense. Just wanted to acknowledge that. Moving on, while we're here, we can go ahead and toggle on our high pass. This one, again, pretty aggressive. It's at about 95. We are killing all of this unwanted, boomy, low-end information that we do not need. The next adjustment we can look at is this thin purple guy that's kind of just covering our bases here, filling in the gaps. Let's hear it in isolation.
Who whisper words, who whisper words, who whisper words.
Yep, it's right around 480, so near that 500 treble spot. I feel like when we engage it, it just continues to clear up that space. This low mid range is just so overly present. Nice. And those are our big, giant low mid and mid range cuts. Next, we have two little high and high mid boosts here, just giving us some extra brightness, extra clarity. Let's hear those ranges.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man. We'll be stronger if we erase the man.
Nice. Yep. Just giving us a little bit extra brightness and clarity. And that does it for our EQ curves. Let's do our normal thing and turn off the entire EQ, turn on the entire EQ. Here are the before and after.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man. We'll be stronger if we erase the man.
Wow, what a world of difference. Okay, great. And then just like our last vocal, let's crash through our vocal chains here. Immediately after our tone shaping EQ, we have another EQ, which now that we look at it, it is punishing 1K even more. We are killing that range even more. We can toggle it on and off and hear the before and after.
We'll be stronger. Who will be stronger if we erase the man.
Nice. Makes such a big difference. We just still have excess of that 1K. I consider the second EQ like still like the tone shaping part 2. You know, the first one just didn't totally get the job done, so I added this extra one to really seal the deal here. Again, we have another band that is lowering our fundamental. We can hear that real quick.
Who we wanna forget how.
You know, let's actually just quickly hear the vocal with both of these tone shaping EQs on and off.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man. We'll be stronger if we erase the man.
Great, let's continue on and crash and burn through the rest of the vocal processing chain. This first compressor is, again, similar to our last one, pretty gentle. It's only a 2-to-1 ratio, a little bit of a faster attack, a medium release. The idea here is that I'm trying to kind of capture everything, get about 1 to 2 dB worth of gain reduction, just squeeze our vocal a little bit tighter. Then we have another compressor, which is basically doing the exact same thing. I might have actually just duplicated the compressor and just hit the vocal with the same compressor twice. A lot of the times that is a more invisible solution than applying one aggressive compressor. Sometimes you'll have better results if you use 2 more gentle compressors instead.
We'll be stronger if we erase.
Then we're hitting a third compressor. This one is definitely our most aggressive. It's maybe closer to 4 or 5 to 1 is our ratio. A super fast attack, pretty fast release. We're trying to capture everything and get an additional 1 to 3 dB of gain reduction.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man.
Nice, and that's our dynamic processing. We close out our vocal chain with another EQ here, opening up the hood. It's super subtle, a high shelf cut. We're just reducing, pulling back some of the top end brightness, and then kind of counterintuitively, we are bringing back some of the low mid body that we cut so aggressively earlier in the chain. That's one of those things where I was probably, as I was mixing and massaging the vocal into the song, I probably discovered, like, you know what? I think I need to give back some of that low mid body that I cut. It's a little bit too thin. We can hear those bands real fast.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man. Words we wanna forget how.
Great, and that is our vocal processing chain. Let's take a minute and look at our vocal reverb, because I'm actually applying a EQ on the reverb, which is cool. Definitely worth spending a second and talking about that. Let's hear our vocal with the reverb on.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man who whisper words we wanna forget how loudly our laughter could have rung.
Nice. Sounds awesome. This is definitely one of the more wet vocals I've ever mixed. Usually I like to keep things dry, but the client wanted a particularly washy vocal sound, so that's what she got. Pulling up our EQ for our vocal, it's super simple. We have a high pass and a low pass. The high pass on our vocal, the idea being that we're trying to reduce the body. We want to minimize the amount of low mid buildup happening. But the more important adjustment is the low pass up there, which is pretty aggressive. It's set at about 5K. That is a typical reverb EQ. With vocal reverb, it's usually wise to low pass out all of the harsh S sounds. We don't want to reverberate overly bright and harsh S sounds. You can hear what I'm talking about if we listen to playback and turn on and off this EQ. The vocal reverb goes from smooth and dark and mysterious to bright and harsh and too dominant, just kind of like washes all over and covers up the vocal in an unflattering way. So let's hear that.
We'll be stronger if we erase the man. We'll be stronger if we erase the man.
Yeah, so without that vocal reverb, high and low pass, the reverb just gets totally out of control and just takes up way more space than it needs to. Definitely worth it. Super simple adjustment you can make that will keep your vocal reverb from getting out of control. And that does it. That covers our vocal EQ, our vocal processing chain. We touched on vocal reverb, which was cool. That concludes our deep dive mini series. I hope that you found this helpful. Thank you for sticking around all the way to the end. Again, friendly reminder that this course comes with mix feedback. So please do not be shy. Don't be a stranger. Send me whatever you are working on, and I would love to work with you to make it the best that it can possibly be. Thanks again. Appreciate you, and I will see you next time.